Estás escuchando Programadores Anónimos.
Welcome to Programadores Anonymous Special Edition 100% in English. In this episode, we will be talking with two Imagine AI engineers about the present, the past, and the future of the software development frameworks. We are looking for new patrons. If you like the content, please support us by sharing the podcast, or if you are feeling lucky, getting a monthly subscription to our Patreon in Programadores Anonymous is not only about podcasting. We offer software development mentoring, post exciting job offer, and we have this kind of express show. As usual, today we will be using nicknames. Please welcome to Kenny,
Hey everyone.
and also we are here with Kyle,
Hello, everyone. Nice to be here again.
and your host today will pick Carmen. Okay, so let's start direct to the point. The idea is just to start growing the level of this talking, and let's start by explaining what a framework is. So, what are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, thanks. Good question. When you think of computer languages like Python, Ruby, JavaScript, those are kind of the building blocks of your software or your application. But often you're not directly coding or programming in Python or JavaScript, right? You use a set of libraries and frameworks. So a framework is essentially a collection of some common classes, some common libraries, some common pieces of code which allow you to program at a higher layer of abstraction than just using the core language. So, as an example, Django or Flask are frameworks built on top of Python. Uh, Angular, React, these are frameworks built on top of JavaScript. And over time, we see more and more frameworks coming built on different languages which exist.
Oh, that's awesome. So, do you have something extra to say about that, Kyle?
Yes, I think it's good to differentiate between a framework and a library. A library just serves for a very specific purpose in a specific language for solving a specific problem. But a framework provides also the structure for you to solve a wider set of problems through the code. So yeah, it's also like a higher level of abstraction over a library because it provides a way wider set of tools for you to work with.
Yeah.
Okay. I just want to, let's move into a timeline. So I know that computer science start, with machines and how to calculate stuff, but we get the computers, and after that, the software appear on top of the hardware. So, at what time of the story of the history we start thinking about frameworks? Because before that, everything was okay. Let's create drivers. Let's create let's make something awesome on top of the hardware that we had. But at what point of the history we start thinking about frameworks?
Yeah, great question. So I would say, when you think of software built on top of hardware, the abstractions have always kept on increasing in power. So starting from, the 70s when people would actually program in assembly languages, and then, the development of high level languages like C, uh, Pascal, like a lot of these in 70s and 80s. And then, you started seeing the concepts of object-oriented programming where there were these abstractions that you could think in, not just like single instructions to program to computers, but also, in terms of objects or higher order, like building blocks, right? And then you started getting these high level languages like C, Java, and once these matured, that's kind of when this concept of frameworks came about. I would say, it was in early 2000s that this concept started. And you started seeing, even with JavaScript, if you look at the history, people started coding in pure JavaScript, and then over time you saw the development of, let's say, things like jQuery. This was, like in like early 2000s, which provided, just like some nifty functions or some nifty tools built on top of JavaScript, so you didn't have to do the same things over and over. And then you saw that these abstractions further improved over time. But I would say, this need for like frameworks, and it actually grew pretty organically. Like once these languages were released, a lot of people, especially in the open source community, they were like, hey, let me build this small set of functions which are very helpful utilitarian functions, and uh, release it to everybody. And those became frameworks. Those developed into frameworks over time. Uh,
Yeah, and I would say it has some relation with the startup community, right? Because people need things like really quick, and that's one of the features with framework, right?
right. Yeah, so the comparison with, let's say, a language is, changes in a language are not that easy to do, like if you want to make changes to C or Python or Java, that's a slower process. Whereas with frameworks, if you want to make changes, like frameworks are able to evolve at a much higher pace, and adapt quickly to, the requirements and the needs of the market. So that allows for faster innovation, and therefore, people prefer to build things using frameworks versus, just using the direct languages.
Yeah, I actually believe that frameworks, the keyword like for understanding frameworks is understanding abstraction. So when you start trying to you start doing projects, for example, I think this is the organic growth of frameworks, and you see that or you need something or what you are doing in all the frameworks can be just abstracted to a place where you can just reuse it somehow and just save yourself time, not reinvent the wheel every time. I think in that moment the frameworks start arising. I really think it's good that you clarify that we are speaking about depth frameworks because framework as it's an abstraction, you actually have frameworks for different things like marketing frameworks, like a framework for managing your project or your team or something. So,
Yeah.
so I think it's good that in software specifically, it just comes from abstraction. What pieces of code can I abstract such that it can help a wider set of projects in the future?
Oh, yes, and good. So it looks like McDonald's created a framework instead of a restaurant, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
That was my point. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. It's like at what level of abstraction you think, right? Like the same problem you could be thinking at different layers of abstraction.
Okay, and now for my next question, I've been thinking, and what's the reason about most of the framework are open source? I mean, I know that there are a couple of framework that you can pay for the enterprise version, but I mean, if you see everybody on the industry, they are using Angular, they are using, many frameworks that are for free. So why that is happening?
Yeah, so I think the reason ties to how these frameworks are developed. A lot. If you look at most of the popular frameworks, they were not developed by a company; they were developed by the community, and that's really the power behind these frameworks and their success. And an essential part of that, therefore, is that it has to be open source, and it allows for the larger community to participate and push and just faster innovation, right? And one key point there is, the success of a framework, or rather any product, depends on what user feedback is incorporated into it. When people truly are like, okay, I have this problem, and I need a solution, That's when they, let's say, add it to the framework, or they release an open source library or a piece of code which solves it, and that gets incorporated. And someone else is like, oh, I have the same problem. Can I use this? So that's organically, that's how, like, these frameworks grew. Versus, an enterprise might have a very singular point of view that, okay, these are our customers and we'll only solve their problems. Whereas, if a larger community is involved, it incorporates the problems of a larger set of audience, and therefore the frameworks become more powerful because they can solve a much larger problem of a much larger audience. And the necessary thing for that is that it has to be therefore open source and allow people to contribute. And that's true. Like, if you think of all the popular frameworks out there, like React is even though, it's a beautiful thing that it's supported by companies like Facebook, but it's completely open source. And like Angular is supported by Google. So I would say, these enterprises do play an important role in supporting frameworks and supporting the open source community. But the good thing is that the incentives are aligned in this case, and it's worked out well so far.
Yeah,
Starting with all the way from Linux, if you think of
Yeah.
1990s when Linux was built, uh, I would say it was kind of the genesis of this open source movement, and it's been one of the most successful pieces of software ever, I would say.
yeah, since the GNU of Stallman, but I agree with all that. I think that if you don't make a framework like open source, it will limit the reach of the framework. And yeah, if you have a framework that only 10 people will work on, like will help only 10 people, then it's not useful. It's just a batch of code that it can be, and it will have lots of bugs because 10 people, like for the big normal problems that a framework tries to solve, it's not enough for what you are looking for. And actually, it helps increase the speed of development of the whole industry. So even open source, people is discussing about this, but open source is rentable in that even companies have to use open source, because without open source, companies have to grow a lot less, like a lot slower. And one proof of it, and I actually saw a talk with Tony Hawk, which is a skater, and he said like, oh, actually, skating is like kind of open source, because as soon as people started recording the tricks they did, people started improving on them. So now everybody was like collaborating, everybody was learning new tricks, and it was like it just grew the movement a lot. So I think even there is this has a lot of potential being open source to not only dev communities but like in a lot of other places. Yeah.
Yeah, and right now what I'm thinking is, okay, we have a problem here because we need community. In order to get a community, you need to get viral, and to get viral, you need marketing, and you need the money, and you need to grow up. How if you create a piece of software? I mean, I don't know, just this framework to this particular problem. How do you get known? I mean, do you have an idea to how to start like my framework journey? Let's say like that.
Yeah, I guess what you're trying to say is, if you have a framework or a solution to a particular problem and you want to grow that in this sort of open source way, how do you go about it, right? So there have been actually a lot of success cases like this. I would say there are a few different routes you can take. You can go completely, let's say, a non-enterprise route, and you say, hey, this is something I just want to grow organically over time. Or you could say, you want to potentially build it into a sustainable business. Uh, and both those routes are viable routes. An example of the second route, for example, is MongoDB, which you might have heard is a popular database, a NoSQL database, which is an open source project, and it's very widely used by a lot of developers around the world. And it started as an open source project, and then over time they realized that it's also applicable to companies, and they were able to grow an enterprise use case out of it. But the key reason for their success was that it was free, open source, and usable by a very wide audience around the world. And if you can achieve that distribution initially, and it's useful for people, then hey, once that engineer who used it in their project goes to a particular company, they will be your advocates, and they will say, hey, like, let's use this in the problem we are solving, and therefore the company would end up buying that product if there's an enterprise version. So there's kind of this path you have from building it as an open source project, and then being able to actually turn it into a viable business. uh, and the on the other side, if you want to purely grow it organically, like there's no enterprise kind of use case, uh, the benefit of going open source is, again, you involve a much wider audience, and it's kind of a distributed ownership model, right? Like, even though you might have started the project, you have other people who now take ownership, and they want to contribute to it, they want to kind of help grow it further, they adopt it, they improve it. So it's kind of like, even your marketing or distribution effort, it's not just on you anymore. It becomes like this shared effort that everyone is trying to promote. uh, so that's and the other, I think, thing is that a lot of open source projects are very collaborative in nature, so they are working with each other, they are sharing ideas, they are interoperating, and that also allows you to kind of grow organically.
Yeah, so I would say like maybe my last question related with the present, because we have been talking about Angular, React, and everything, right? Um, and do you know why? I mean, do you have any idea why people hate frameworks? Like, okay, this is one of the most used framework for a reason, because maybe banks use it. I'm talking about Angular, right? And at some point, the community start using it a lot. They love it. Okay, this is a good solution. They iterate for a reason, for the best of the framework, and people start hating it after that iteration. And now React do the same, and the other frameworks are doing the kind of the same thing, but people love it. And I'm not sure what the Angular team did wrong, because it's not that bad, but people hate it.
Actually, that's a very, very fascinating thing. I remember using Angular first in 2012 or so, and it was before React. And I was like, this is great, because I had been using jQuery before that, and I was like, okay, this is clearly the next level of abstraction. Uh, but I think where the Angular community failed was they actually took a long time, almost 3 to 4 years, in developing a new version of Angular. So they were clearly a step up from jQuery. So there was no doubt it was like a better solution. But like, then React came, and React was a they what React was able to do was build on top of what Angular did, and add to that ideas, and it was a newer framework. And Angular did not innovate fast enough. They took like 3-4 years to build a new version, and React continued to iterate very quickly. And I think one of the reasons was, like even the support. I think Angular was supported by Google, whereas React was supported by Facebook. And it might even point to perhaps the ethos of both of these companies, where Facebook has an ethos of just move fast, break things, like be very fast, whereas Google is a bit more like, hey, let's do this properly, let's do things properly, kind of a mindset. So they did come up with a new version, a few years ago, and it was a great improvement. But by then, React had already taken a lot of mind share.
Yeah.
Sometimes these open source projects were like a startup that you have to move fast, or there will be another project that will take like a large portion of the community and just say, look, what we do is like this. We improve on comparing to this other project in these ways, and it will be easier for you to start with this because our documentation is better or whatever. But and that can improve a lot of the like the reach you get to the community.
Yeah, so sounds good. So right now I want to start talking about the future, because I say, okay, what should be the next step? Could we have like frameworks that generate framework for us or something like that?
Yeah, that's that's exactly, I think the direction that things are headed. Uh, we started with like current frameworks. If you think of them, they are focused on one part of a software product. They're either a back-end framework or a front-end framework or a mobile framework. But increasingly, as people think of products or a software product, you're not thinking of just those components, right? You're thinking, okay, this is a problem I'm solving for my user, and you're not thinking of like back end, front end, mobile, watch, and these things are exploding. So increasingly, frameworks are moving in the direction of kind of taking this holistic view that back end and front end and mobile, they're all kind of coming together, and that's a direction that even current frameworks are taking, like Flutter or React with React Native, where they are combining mobile and web. Next.js, which is kind of trying to combine the back end and the front end. Uh, and we will continue to see this evolution, and people taking much abstraction and that next viewpoint. And it leads to an interesting thing that there would be uh, probably uh, frameworks, as you mentioned, which create other frameworks, or these kind of meta frameworks, which we might start seeing in the near future.
Uh,
Believe that even like there is I think a sentence by Jerry Seinfeld or something that says something like innovation comes from just automating what you don't like to do. So I think that's a key point of doing this kind of. I think that's where the future is heading, is just to see what these frameworks have to offer, what they have in common, and start creating abstractions over it, so people don't have to worry about those things anymore, and they just can focus on what's really important about a specific domain business and that kind of thing.
yeah, that
Yeah, if you
sounds
think
really awesome. Yeah, yeah, go ahead.
yeah, if you think of various features that different frameworks have, a lot of them are conceptually the same feature, but they just have slight variations in how they implement it. So so that when you start seeing things like that, that's when you realize you can abstract those out to a higher level. uh, and the other interesting phenomena why that we might see that is just because the number of platforms is exploding, right? You started with just having websites. Now you have phones, you have watches, you have Internet of Things, and 5 years out or 10 years out, your home might, your fridge might have an application, your microwave would have some applications, so that the number of channels is just going to explode, and therefore you need frameworks which are kind of at a higher level, and not just you cannot have frameworks which are specific to each channel anymore.
Yes, and I also believe, just to finish this part, is that this will not only, because we think normally as frameworks as benefiting the developer, but I think it will benefit the whole industry because it can move faster. For example, we have seen a lot of Reddit posts when people is like, hey, how do I implement authentication in X framework? And you are like, okay, but this has been solved by 3 million people 100 times, and it's the same every time. So why shouldn't we just create an abstraction over it, and it's just as easy as that for, yeah, for future developments.
Okay, so it looks like we are running out of time here, but well, I think at this last part of the show, would you mind to tell us what do you do at Imagine AI?
Sure. Thanks. So I'm actually the co-founder of Imagine AI. So I came up with this idea, and we started this company. And yeah, I've been in the software industry for over 15 years. Worked and I've built companies before this, and over the last 8 years, actually, I've led the development of over 80 different projects across web, mobile, backend, and that's kind of where this idea came from, because I saw personally that we were reinventing the wheel over and over again in different projects. So it made sense to come up with, for me to come up with like this meta framework which is able to solve this repetition of the wheel which is happening all over all the time. uh,
And I work as a research frameworks engineer in Imagine, and also I'm the community lead of Latin America. And yeah, I really liked when Anushir and me spoke at the first time. I really thought like our vision of software was similar. We like just like making software easier for devs. It will open the doors for more developers to just join the industry. It will also help a lot of people to start their projects, and it will save a lot of time to companies and to the developers themselves. So I think it will improve the speed with the that the humanity is moving with, because right now the digital products and the virtuality is very important, and I think if you abstract and you do the right things, the right steps to help people to create digital products, or yeah, any product, it will just help overall a whole set of industries in general. So we started speaking about this. I really believed in, like, he told me about his background, and he told me what they have made, and I was like just impressed with it, and that's why I joined Imagine. I think uh, we have a very nice proposition to that will improve the future of software development, and yeah, I was just excited to work with such intelligent people.
Yeah, sounds really awesome. Just like my last comment to remind, technology evolved really fast. As you see, everything started with assembly. After that, we got the development languages, we got the frameworks, and now we are talking about meta frameworks. So you have to remember that you need to study. If you don't study and you don't move fast with the technology, you will lose your job. So don't be that guy that doesn't like to study. And yeah, and just like one last comment that you want to mention, maybe how they can email you or something if they have question about that, or maybe something that you want to say about the company. And yeah, the microphone is on your side.
Thanks. Yeah, so we actually have some exciting things today. So we actually announced and released a public version of our product today. And it's a very easy to use web UI, which allows you to specify your project. And if you're starting a new project in Node or Django, you can actually use this interface and come up with a very high quality code base to begin with. So it would allow you to use all the best practices which you might have read in books or blogs, and actually use it in your projects, and also learn from them. And it's as mentioned, it's very important to use good practices and do things in the right way. And that's kind of the tool we built to help you with this goal. So we're actually live on Product Hunt. So if you go to producthunt.com, and search for Imagine, you will be able to see us there. You can join the discussion there that we are having with the community around, how you can use Imagine, how you can, or how, like, what are good practices to use in software development. And yeah, you please join the discussion there, and there's also a link where you can go and use the product and check it out. And we would love feedback, so please share any feedback and any thoughts and any ideas for features you would like to see. uh,
Also have like a LinkedIn page, and we also have a communities that are in the product hunt post and in the Hacker News post. So yeah, feel free to join the communities. Feel free to join the follow us on LinkedIn and follow us on Twitter. I guess I will send this information to Cartman later today, so we can he can share it in the like in the
Yeah,
transmission and that kind of thing.
YouTube
Uh,
description.
and
We will get the
and yeah,
URL.
please join us and give us all your feedback. I like we tell, like, contribution from the community is the most important thing for us to advance fast and make like the life of as many developers as possible easier. So yeah, please join our communities.
Okay, so thank you, our speaker, for the time. Thank you all for listening. This was another episode of Programadores Anonymous Special Edition, first time ever, 100% in English. I hope you enjoy it. Good sign to everybody. That's all.